Episode 6. Hey everybody, you're listening to the Never Forsaken podcast, looking at the lives of the outcasts, the seekers, the never forsakens, those in or out of the local church and passionate about Christ. The show is broadcast weekly, and show notes and more information can be found at neverforsakenpodcast.com. I'm your host, John Robinson. Let's get into the show. Hey friends, thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Never Forsaken podcast. If you follow me on Facebook or Twitter, you know that I'm always asking for you to go to iTunes and Stitcher and subscribe, rate, and review the show. Just takes you about 2-3 minutes to do that. It would help me out tremendously. Also, if you go to neverforsakenpodcast.com, the actual website, a couple things over there. You'll be able to find all the shows there if you don't have access to iTunes or Stitcher apps. Got my affiliate, Steve Pointer, and NutriJectMeals.com is fit food delivery. Steve's a local guy, local businessman that makes actual homemade fresh meals, not frozen. He understands the stress that people have in life and in preparing meals, and this is just kind of one way to help you out. You might be using these meals at home or at your job, or if you're a bodybuilder, competitor, some kind of an athlete, you can bring fresh meals with you. Steve cooks the meals with the highest quality foods. He measures them out, perfect proportions to fit your needs, packages them airtight so they're contamination and leak proof, and then ships them out to you that same day. You're going to get fresh, high quality, perfectly portioned meals delivered to your doorstep by FedEx overnight delivery. Getting fit and healthy just got easier. So head on over to neverforsakenpodcast.com, check out the affiliate link. You can use the code NFP10 and save 10% off your order. Anyway, just relax, sit back, and enjoy the next episode. Okay, welcome podcast listeners to another episode of the Never Forsaken podcast. My guest today is good friend Joey Monteverde. He's got a history in Christianity as a missionary, Bible college student, pastor, and he's going to talk a little bit about his journey, and he's also going to share some good tips, or I should say some concerns that he has when he's, and how he deals with Christians nowadays. Joey, welcome to the show. It's great to have you.
Thank you, John. Good to be here. How are you today?
Oh, I'm doing great, man. I can't complain. So we met years ago, Joey, on the internet, kind of through some mutual martial artist friends, and believe that we developed a pretty good rapport, which eventually led into discussions on Christianity. And Joe, you can somewhat be slightly abrasive, if I can say that.
Yeah, of course.
But it's good. I think I'm kind of the same way in some ways, and even though there were times when you kind of get me going and back and forth a little bit, I had a lot of respect for you in that the manner in which you dealt with me compared to the way in which you dealt with maybe some other Christians that I've seen online, there was a little bit of a difference. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. But Joey, you were a pastor before and a missionary. I'd like to hear some of your backstory and if you'd share some of that history with our listeners.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I was. I guess it kind of started from the beginning, and like not wanting to do a whole way back when I was born, but I mean it kind of does flow into that. Online, I go by the name of Joey Four Fingers. Simply because I was born with a, we'll call it a disability because that's the easiest way to name it, but I was missing my radial bone in my right arm as well as my right thumb. So my right arm is shorter than my left arm by a good 4 1/4 inches. I'm missing my right thumb and I have no wrist. Everything's fused together because I don't have that second bone to make the wrist a proper wrist. So being born with, differences than other children, and I also shouldn't have actually been born. My mother had a huge tumor the size of a grapefruit in her uterus, and doctors said, your kid's probably going to come out, not alive. So my mom, being a very religious person, she grew up in Protestant Christianity, and, started praying her socks off, saying, "Hey God, if you can make sure my son's born, I'll make sure that he knows you. I will make sure that he's raised in church, and as long as you make him healthy and alive and here, then he will be in church as much as I can get him in church." And I was born, Had all the random surgeries to make my arm, straight and normal and such. And, ever since I was little, I was in the church. When she would go on Sundays multiple times and midweek multiple times, she would bring me in a little carrier. And then when I was old enough to, crawl around, she would give me little coloring books. And then she would give me little flyers with questions and Bible verses, and on the way up and up and up. And my mother and father were never married, so I basically went to church as often as my mom went to church, and she loved to really help. She loved to clean the bathrooms and help cook food and be there when people come off the streets to have questions, and that was really her. She was one that really, in certain aspects, loved to show the love of Christ to people. Now, she ended up being a really extreme alcoholic and was a very mean person in other regards, but as long as she was at church and she was sober, she was a really wonderful person during those moments. So growing up, I started, taking martial arts and stuff to defend against bullies because of the, disability, and that was, my mom started me in that when, she says 3 years old, but I can't remember back to 3. I can remember about 5 years old, so I usually tell people 5, and, that became a passion. Really, my passions growing up was church. I, read my Bible every day. I went to church. I went to study. I hung out with friends that were only part of church. Martial arts. And cooking. My mom, being an alcoholic, would always go to sleep around 4 in the afternoon after a good, 2-3 bottles of wine, and I would end up having to cook for myself. So I learned how to cook at a very young age, which was, phenomenal for, my wife. Nowadays, she doesn't have to cook. I usually do all the cooking.
That's great.
It really is. So I mean, growing up without that, my father was still around. I love my father. I'm more connected and close to my father than I ever had been with my mom. But, my father really didn't have too much say in, where and what and how, and I didn't really have a good leader figure because I hung out with my dad usually, once a week or something like that, and we'd go do something I wanted to do with my dad, not, life lessons sort of thing, even though I learned so much from my dad during those moments looking back. I would, after school, after junior high, I would, go home, drop off my skateboard or something, and then run to church. And I would hang out at church, the whole rest of the day, the whole afternoon. They called it, I think it was called 8th period or something like that, because there's only 7 periods, or maybe it was 9th period. There's only so many periods in junior high, and then, everybody would, all the church kids would go to church and hang out. Their parents were working and something like that, and it was kind of like an initiative that the church had to keep the kids off the streets and stuff. The church had a pool table and foosball tables and ping pong tables, and they eventually built a half pipe for skateboarders and everything. It was a really, progressive church. It was one of the Calvary Chapel branches that is really popular and famous. That eventually becomes the college that I went to, and so growing up in church, I was there all the time. I started, wanting to learn to teach. All of my mentors were the other pastors. I had the junior high pastor and high school pastor and college age pastors, and I would hang out with them all day long. Even when they would do, errands and stuff, I really became almost like a either older brother and younger brother or father-son sort of relationship with these men that were really uplifting and beneficial growing up when I was younger. I got to spend so much time with them, hang out with them at their house, babysit their kids, everything. And I started, teaching more and more. They have me, say a few Bible verses or a short study in the junior high ministry. And then eventually, towards the end of junior high, I started teaching the Sunday school kids, which was the 1st to 5th graders. And started doing that. I did that for 6 months. I had all of the different handouts and pamphlets and syllabus and study guides to get through like a whole year's worth of Sunday school and coloring books and everything. I still have all of those. They're still amazing resources on CDs that I have, and really enjoyed that part of teaching. After I started to finish my time doing Sunday schools, when I started doing missionary work, and it would have been not my first time out of the country. I'd been to Mexico. I have extended family living in Mexico, and I went on a cruise ship with my father. My father teaches ballroom dancing and takes his students on a cruise once a year. So I got to go to Jamaica and Cozumel, Mexico, and Haiti for a little while, which was pretty fun. But it was still a really good experience to go out of the country. We went to Russia and did some missions work in Russia for the first mission trip. We did a little skit. I played the devil, which is, kind of funny looking back from being an atheist now. But they said that,
it's the goatee, Joe. It's the goatee. Is that what it is?
It really was. I think it was the goatee.
The goatee gives that appearance.
Weird brow, Yeah. Yeah, I had the goatee growing up for a while because I always felt like I was younger than I was, so the goatee made me look older. And I think you're right. That could have been what it was. I also wore a lot of red. That was my favorite color.
Oh, okay. That's wild. So you do all this missionary work. You've got some great experiences. You're from what I hear, you're growing up in the church. It's very positive. It's not like you had negative experiences growing up. So you continue on this path and you're doing missionary work, and does the journey start to change for you, or does it still kind of go this way for a while?
Yeah, it really, it really goes the same way. For a long time, I was a really solid believer. I still had, all of the, even being as deeply involved in the church, there's a lot of parents that would think, if I keep my kid, on the straight and narrow, like perfect, nothing will ever happen. And we see that with, a lot of, females that have overbearing religious parents. They end up, breaking out into all kinds of, negative lifestyles. And not saying things like that don't happen. They do almost across the board. It doesn't matter if you're in a religious family or not. So, I started doing, marijuana and trying other types of drugs that, friends, brothers, or uncles or whatever would have, because obviously this is, beginning high school, middle end of high school sort of thing. And, I, being as, religiously involved as I was and trying to, I really wanted to eventually be a pastor. That's what I was going for. I'd start having experiences that, some people might say a haunted house, or a friend of mine, looking back, I kind of write it off as either epilepsy or a seizure, but, we thought he was possessed. We prayed for him for like 4 hours. He was doing all kinds of weird stuff. We were seeing weird stuff, and, there wasn't any drugs involved that night, but, random shadows that shouldn't be there, random sounds and voices that we all heard at the same time sort of thing that were really, interesting to note. So, even in the younger years, I was still trying to be a pastor. Like I said, grew up later, eventually went into Bible college. Obviously the drugs were left in high school and stuff, but went into Bible college, really wanted to get involved, like hardcore. I was literally reading my Bible for about 4 or 5 hours a day, plus listening to the Bible on audio on double speed, plus doing all of my homework, doing, up to 8 or 9 hours of just personal study time on top of the classes, which were extremely long as it is. Bible college classes are twice as long as any other class out there. Don't care what school you go to. It's crazy. They're like 4 hours long in a chunk. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I'm a seminary dropout, so I know it's pretty demanding. And I would say that in the seminary program I was in, it was a lot more involved than your average college program.
Yeah, I would probably assume so. I think they would probably have more. I think they just have more expectations of you. They want you to be, as almost like I really respect the Mormon faith for the fact that they drive in that whole, making sure that you are as learned as you possibly can be before you go out and talk to people. And I think that's what the seminary tries to do, because of most of the other Christian denominations don't have a really solid missionary foundation, that they want to make sure that their teachers, if you're going to seminary, really know their stuff. So I think that's what they expect from you. Plus, also, the verse in Jude that says that the teachers and preachers will be judged more than anyone else. So if you have a chance of being judged by God at a more severe rate than others, then they have better invested into you to make sure that, you don't end up slipping away.
I think that's a good point. That's something that you bring up is like with the Mormon faith. I can respect that same thing. They do a tremendous amount of education and a tremendous amount of mission work, and it seems that isn't a requirement for your average Christian denomination. It's kind of like it almost becomes in some ways a numbers game. It's like come in, get saved, and get comfortable. That's my experience in a lot of churches, and I'm not going judgmental across the board. I know there's a lot of well-learned people and evangelists. It just never seems to be the focus of almost anywhere that I've been. When you come in, it's kind of on your own to do it. Mm-hmm. So if you're a motivated person like myself, I get into a lot of study and was big time street evangelist for a while. But I did that on my own. It's not anything that somebody drove me to do.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what I find is most of the people that are even the best at doing it. I mean, I guess it's like that way with almost anything else in life, whether it's martial arts or sciences or auto mechanics. Is the people that excel are the people that want to do it, and that's what my friends and I that we grew up together. I was the pastor, basically, even from the beginning. I was the one that loved to share the word. I had a friend that was amazing at guitar, and he ended up being a worship pastor at Calvary Chapel, Hamilton, California, before he passed. He was in an automobile accident a few years ago, but an amazing guy. Really helped, my youth, just being a really good friend. We had a few other friends that were good singers, and they made on the worship team, and a few people that ended up going into banking that ended up going back to the church and being accountants at the church. And it was kind of cool to see this little group that I grew up with all going in the same direction, because that was our passion. That's what we loved. Like I said at the beginning, I had the Bible, martial arts, and cooking. And, it's just, I still read the Bible, even as an atheist. I still read the Bible here and there, because it's still, somewhere in me that I really like to read and study. I love religions in general. I'll still read the Don Padre. I'll still read I haven't read the Quran yet, which I've been told that from many scholars, just on a very non-religious level, that it is an interesting piece of historical literature that I should pick up. But I love reading anything about religions. It just fascinates me the way that people in all different walks of life can find something that inspires them and motivates them to have a happy and good life.
That's a good point. I think sometimes as Christians we get, obviously we kind of run into this dichotomy, because we do have a belief of Jesus Christ and what he said he was the way, the truth, the life. And a lot of times that forces Christians to become extremely narrow-minded and just completely shut everything else out. And I think you do a disservice to yourself. Like, as a Christian, you may not want to believe other ways, but I think it's important to at least explore these avenues as far as to be educated about them. It's not that you have to accept Buddhism or Hinduism or something else as your way of life, but I think it's important to at least have an education on it to be able to have a conversation with that kind of person. You did something probably about a year or so ago. You had some atheist books and asked me if I wanted them. And at first I was like, why would I want these books that, they have got nothing to do with the faith? But I was going through a kind of a time of searching, and so I took the books and I digested them, and if anything, it deepened my faith a little bit. But but that's a good thing. I think it was good for me to read and to be open and see what are the arguments that atheists have against Christianity. And in all honesty, a lot of what they bring against the church, other than the belief in God, if I remove that, but a lot of their arguments against the church and against Christians are legitimate arguments that we cannot ignore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'm really glad that it helped you with your faith. I truly am. I personally have a belief. It's kind of like I quote Frank Sinatra. He says, "I don't care what gets you through the night, whether it's pills, prayers, or a bottle of Jack Daniels." That is my sincere belief. I want people to find what works for them in life and go gung-ho. Find your passions, do your passions, find things that inspire you, share that with people. I want to make this world a better and happier place. We only get one shot. From my perspective, I don't believe in an afterlife, so I think that, what you do in this life and how you treat others is what ultimately matters. That's kind of like you kind of touched on a little bit, one of the reasons basically that a lot of people leave the church is for the other people in the church. Surprisingly, it's very much the first things that draw people away from religion is their fellow religion people, the fellow churchgoers, more so than finding different things that may disprove their belief system. A lot of times you'll have Christians, I'll use Christians specifically since that's what I'm most familiar with, but I'm sure it happens in other religions as well, is literally Christianity is probably very much so like unfortunately, in modern times, a cult-type mentality where outsiders really are shunned, yelled at, bickered about, both privately and publicly. You'll have, when I remember times when we would pray for other people. Hey, do you have any prayer requests? Do you have any friends? And so, oh yeah, somebody just moved in next door and really great family. Oh, but they're Hindu. In a very just demeaning tone. And it's like you could just say, oh yeah, it's a really cool family. They come from India. They're, immigrants, whatever like that. They happen to practice or believe in Hinduism. They have these cool statues in their lawn. And it's just the way that you would talk about other people seem to be very demeaning and very, as if you were, self-exalting yourself to be this like, oh, I'm a Christian, therefore I am better than everybody else sort of thing. Especially even when I was leaving the church, that had to be one of the most psychologically damaging things I've ever had to go through. I'd have friends and family, people that I helped babysit them, babysit their kids, people that I've house sat for, people that, I've visited in the hospital and given money to and stuff like that, just really go off. And, I don't know how screwing your show is on profanity, but it was really profane stuff that, people were wishing that I would die, that I would kill myself, that I deserved hell and fire, and and these were brothers and sisters in the church that because I was leaving the faith, they were this vile towards me for wanting to leave, and it was a very eye-opening experience that I didn't even realize that would be that almost like a brainwashed individual. I mean, which is really sad. Christianity should be a way of living and sharing with each other and being a good person and loving and caring. And almost like how you had said that Christianity does a disservice by not studying other cultural systems, whether it's religion or otherwise, it gives them a poor foothold to stand on in a discussion with someone else. Like I said, they try to, in most circles, make themselves appear and look better, and if you're better, then you don't need to learn something from somebody else if it's different.
I don't disagree with you on that point. It's funny, my wife and I were at a church for years that when we decided it was time to move on and we were just kind of pursuing other avenues, we didn't leave the faith, but we left the church, and in this town, we would run into people in public, and it was as if we did leave the faith and became heretics, as you'd still get avoided and you still kind of got called names, and people were told not to hang out with us, not to associate with us. And I kind of would eyebrow that, like, I'm still a Christian, guys. I'm just not part of your fellowship. I'm not part of your little community. I don't see how that changes things.
Exactly. Yeah, it should be, one love. Like, I know that there is 300,000 versions of Christianity, but I mean, at least you still have that unifying bond. I mean, as humans, as pack animals, we want to have stuff that's similar to each other. We want to be part of that pack, that group, that tribe. So, I mean, at least, whether you're Catholic or Mormon or Protestant, or I know people have issues with Mormons sometimes, but or anything, Baptist, the thing that you share is the belief in Christ, and that's all that should matter. And I think that it's very sad to see that one thing that should be the only thing that matters, know my son, know Christ and him crucified. That is what matters. That's what Paul wrote. And that gets overlooked. Oh, like you said, do they go to this fellowship or this fellowship? Oh, they go to that fellowship? Oh, that means that we can't associate with them. We don't have a Mercedes-Benz. Or, oh, they go with that fellowship? They associate with homosexuals. Oh, they go to that fellowship? They party with the homeless. And it's funny because that's exactly what Christ ministered to. Christ had hookers and homeless and tax collectors and government officials as friends. There were all these really, like, scum-type jobs, and that is Christ's point. Everybody needs Christ, and especially the people that are overlooked and shunned and outcasts. Christianity is supposed to be a group of outcasts finding the God together, rather than being, bickered about and talked behind their back, and especially the threats and violence and stuff that ensues from it. The one unifying thing is you all have Christ. Every denomination has Christ, and that is what should be focused on, the love.
Right, loving one another and loving others, and unfortunately in a lot of ways we don't see that today. So what would you say, in addition to that, what are, if you could give a couple of basic tips, what is something that, for a Christian who's listening to this podcast, what is a practical tip or a few tips that you could give to say, this is how to better practice your faith when you're dealing with someone that's not like you?
So I guess first off is I'm going to be a little technical now because it's something that I use a lot, and I apologize for any listener that it might be a little much for, but I love language. I love etymology. And first I'd like to explain that an atheist isn't against your idea of God. So to use math in association with this, and oh my gosh, I know math, it's probably a weekend when you're listening to this, but we have basically 0, and then from 0 we have -1, and we have a +1 on each side of the 0. So in Greek we have theos, which is the word for God, and that's where we get the word theist, someone who believes in God. Then where I would put the -1 is anti-theist, or anti-theos, which is against God, against the idea of God. And then in the 0 spot is where I usually put atheist. And atheist is which is without, theos, God, without God. The reason why I use these words specifically is because it really helps describe the definition of what we're talking about. People use the word agnostic where it should be atheist. Atheist is the definition for what people think agnostic is. The word agnostic comes from which is without, similar to gnoskos, which is knowledge. We see gnoskos many times in the Old Testament if you look for a Greek translated Old Testament. So anybody can be agnostic about anything. I do not know how to build a B-17 bomber from scratch. I don't have knowledge of that. Therefore, I'm agnostic. I'm without knowledge of building a bomber airplane. But I've been cooking since I was 6, so I would say that I'm gnostic. I have knowledge of cooking. So that literally is a descriptive word. It is not an answer. So when people say, oh, do you believe in God? And someone says, I'm agnostic, it just means I have no definitive knowledge. I have no empirical evidence to prove that God exists. I'm agnostic. That's the way that word is supposed to be used. Ultimately, I believe that every atheist and every theist is quote-unquote agnostic, because you don't have proof that there is or isn't a God. Even with anti-theists, there's no proof that there is no God out there whatsoever. So that is kind of something that I usually try to say up front, is to define your terms. Something my father taught me when you're talking to people, is to define what you're talking about. So in definition, atheist without God is what most people think of the word agnostic. Does that make sense?
That makes total sense. I'm glad you make that distinction, and that was something that I've done the research on those words myself as well. But it's important to make that distinction. Let me ask you this, Joey. So you've explained the definitions, and it makes complete sense to me. How do we, as, say, for example, you and I, an atheist and a theist, how do we better bridge that gap, get along with one another, and find our commonalities?
So I think the easiest way for that is to literally, like the golden rule, when they asked Jesus what the most important commandment, and he says, love your neighbor, love God with all your heart, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Right? So in that order. So first, love your God, whichever God you choose, and that's kind of part of it. Is I think that from the Christian side, you need to be one that accepts and loves everyone, no matter where they're at, and even if it's not like a full acceptance, like you don't accept maybe their lifestyle or their belief, you still have to accept them as a person. Love the person, hate the sin, right? Or hate the sin, not the sinner, sort of thing. If they're a different religion than you, or no religion whatsoever, so I mean, with those words that I defined, being a theist means that you can believe in any god. So a theist would still be someone that believes in Hercules or Zeus or Ra, or anybody could technically fall under the definition of theist. Simply, the atheist, someone without God, is someone that says, hey, I've studied this and that, and I looked into Buddhism and Christianity and stuff, and, it doesn't really jive. It doesn't click with me for some reason, so I'm not picking one of those that we already have, so I'm just without a God. And that's all that means. I mean, in just plain English, it just means that you're without a God. You just haven't landed on one yet, or at all. And so I think that that's kind of where you have to look at, is from the atheist side. It's not like someone that believes, although I do say things that are very blunt or making you think on Facebook. I try to really make people think. That's my one goal. Is I don't care what you believe or how you believe, as long as you know what and why you believe it. And it's for good reasons. I know a lot of people that have gone to prison, and you get extra points and you get released earlier if you become part of a religion. So I've met tons of really messed up people that call themselves Christians because they picked it up in prison in order to get out early, but they don't walk it, they don't, they don't act like Christ, which I mean is something that it might be why I talk to you different on Facebook than others, is because no matter how much of an a-hole I'm being online, you still try to come at me with love, which is freaking awesome. And that's what I want to see.
Yeah, or just ignore you.
That's either one, yes.
Ignoring is a form of love sometimes.
I like it.
That's funny.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of it. It's just knowing that everybody's different. Everybody's different. Even conjoined twins are different in the end. I mean, and that's what you have to realize, is the person in front of me is not me. The person in front of me, even if they believe in Jesus, does not believe in Jesus the way that I do. Even the person in front of me does not believe in the same dogma or the same systemology that I'm used to, or the same theology that I'm used to. You try to find, the easiest thing is to find the similarities between each other. But people are still people. Almost like my brothers that were in the military, is there is no races. Everybody's a different shade of green. And me believing in accepting the facts of science, that state evolution, we all basically originated from somewhere in Africa and then spread out to other parts of the world. So, I mean, it's not like you can test two different people and say, oh, yeah, this is this type of person because of their whatever, and it's shown by their skin tone. No, we're all humans. We're all, we're all the same species. And I think that ideals are what cause the anger and violence and separation. So I'd say just accepting the person in front of you is different from you, even if they believe the same things. Is I'm trying to hit home that they are still different, and accepting everybody on the same playing field is key. I mean, now in right. Our current culture for 2015 at least is this huge battle between same-sex marriage, equal opportunity marriage, and a lot of people are really up in arms on severely religious sides and non-religious sides on trying to make sure that everybody has the same human rights. And I understand completely that there are certain verses that can be taken to be against homosexuality, and there's other verses that can be taken for really horrible other things that people don't usually touch on or see on or view or overlook. And I find it amusing that marriage, even though the Bible does have marriage in it and explains how marriage works, people have been getting married for, thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years, and all different forms. And marriage was supposed to be just a union between two people. And I can see the Bible version of wanting it to be, for reproductive purposes, to be between one man and one woman. I mean, the whole Old Testament, a lot of people say it's of bricks and babies. The whole Old Testament is just building new towns, expanding your tribe, and getting new land, new area. So you need to have bricks, you need to build cities and have babies. Have lots and lots of babies and expand your tribe. if we wanted to just do a unity of two people that love each other, slaves back in the early years of the United States would get married by jumping over a broomstick. Did they get any benefits or anything like that from their slave owners or their government or anything? No, it was just I love you, you love me, let's hop over this broomstick, and then we're going to call ourselves married. I'll be faithful and loyal to you, you'll be faithful and loyal to me. And I think that's what the religious side is hung up on, is now in modern times, because there's so many billion people on this planet, we need to make sure that things are more systemized. Sorry about that. Being that marriage now is a government program for taxes, for ownership of land, for benefits to children, that is the reason why marriage is expanding to the gay community. Because, back, like I said, in the day when there were slaves, black people couldn't get married either, but that was because it was a political reason, not that they weren't getting married. They were still, like I said, jumping over the broomsticks and saying, I love you, you love me, let's be loyal to each other forever. The reason why now we have marriage equality is because it's a government ceremony. It's in order for paperwork, for if you die, do you, it's part of like your will, rather than having to make a new will and saying, hey, I'm in love with this man of the same sex. If I die, I want him to have everything. Rather than having to write out a separate will for that, you can now say, oh, we're married now, and then if I die, they get my stuff because we're married. So things like that, just things that might be off color or hard for people to talk about with each other because it may be against, what you personally believe to be true. You might personally believe that people of the same sex shouldn't be together or anything. But you'd have to look at it from every different aspect, being that it's a government thing now. Look at it in that way and say, okay, it's a government thing. Right. And if you look in the Catholic faith, the priest and the nuns are supposed to be symbolically married to Christ, which is why they don't get married and have kids and stuff, because they're already symbolically married to Christ, so they wouldn't need to have a second marriage. And the funny thing is that almost dictates that marriage is separate from the act of sex, because the priest and the nun are married in every sense of the word to Christ and to the church, and they don't, finalize the marriage with I always forget what that word is called, where you have sex to prove that marriage is true. So, if you're only looking at the fact of a bond, then...
Consummate the marriage. There it is.
Consummate. There you go. So, that's it. Thank you. So, if the priest and the nun aren't consummating the marriage, then that means that sex is not a valid requirement for marriage. So, if the argument is that the act of homosexuality, the sex part of homosexuality, is the sin, yet you can be married without consummating the marriage, then two men could be married without consummating their marriage and not actually do the homosexual act. It's just two people of the same sex that happen to be civilly married. That's things like that. Ways of looking at the world like that, I think, would really help people on both sides of just really, learn, study, understand how the world works, understand that there is so much out there that you will never see, you will never understand, you will never hear about, just in different circles, being in martial arts or being in religion or being in various shooting groups that I'm in online. Once you're really involved with a certain group, all of a sudden you're like, hey, and Facebook's a really good example of this, and you say, hey, my notifications from this group aren't really popping up that much anymore. Hey, I haven't heard from this person in a while, I haven't seen them in my feed, and you go to check, oh, we're still friends, but you're so involved in Circle X that you don't see outside of your bubble. You don't see outside of that circle. And it almost creates blinders in a very sociological aspect. And that happens in reality. You will have connections with people that you stay connected to. And with information, if you just keep studying outside your circle. So I remember when I was a missionary, we would actually get the Book of Mormon and read through it and figure out what it is. Because, when I was in church, and kind of what I touched on earlier was that we should all be united, if you're a Christian, in anybody that believes in Christ. That's kind of one that I look back on and said, hey, you guys are being stupid, just love each other for having that connection. But when I was in church, when I was a pastor, we were all, the Mormons are evil, the Mormons are, this, and they twist the Bible this way, and then the Baptists twist the Bible this way. So we would study people's dogmas, people's books that they had as a secondary to the Bible to help them do their churchly duties to figure out why they were different. We would study other religions and Buddhism and stuff to figure out why they're different and how we can try to convert them. I guess that would be another point, is rather than trying to only be out there to convert people back to your faith, to actually, back to the beginning, love God and love your neighbors yourself. If you really went out just to love people, there was a book that my dad had me read when I was younger, and it was called The Greatest Salesman in the World. It's a small book by Og Mandeville. I think it's maybe only 100 pages. You can read it in an afternoon. But it's these 7 magical scrolls that had the answers to life on how to make more money and have more friends and stuff. And basically what you're supposed to do is read these. Each scroll is a chapter. It's like 5 pages, and you read each one when you wake up and when you go to bed for 30 days. Then you go to the next one for 30 days. At the end of 7 months, basically, you've read all 7 scrolls 30 times each, or 31 or 28 or whatever the month happened to be. But basically, the interesting thing that I saw when I was younger is I'm like, hey, Dad, basically all this is just advice on being a good person. And it's like the scroll would say, I wake up with love in my heart. I have nothing but love in my heart. I will go out and show love to everybody I meet. I will have a smile on my face and show love through my smile. I will show love through my actions. Things like that, just repetitive phrases like that, just to get it in you. And people are so competitive and trying to, like I said, in the church, trying to get numbers, get those butts in the seats to get more tithing in. It's less out of love. And if you literally tried to meet and communicate with everybody out of love, then I think that you would have more congregational surplus in the end. You can go in and find a fellowship and sit there and stay through 2 services and leave, and oftentimes most people won't even say 2 words to you, and it's really sad. Even with small churches, it's just, it's somebody new. They're not in our group. Our group's already here. Our group sits here. I sit here. They sit there. Susie sits there. John sits there. Mary sits there. And this is somebody new, and they're an outsider. And even if it's not verbalized, it's still a feeling. I remember feeling that feeling when I was in church and seeing new people, and it's like they're an outsider. They're not part of our group. And it's that mentality that needs to be abolished in order to make any further progress. Now, for 2015, church attendance has dwindled down to where people that don't go to church is now at 30%, whereas in 2008 it was at 13%. So, people are leaving churches for all kinds of different reasons, but I think that if the churches were trying to show more of love and respect and unity, it would be a lot more beneficial.
I'm with you, man. I think it's unfortunate that we have to have these reminders, and whether they be from Christianity or like from that book you mentioned, it's kind of sad that we have to be reminded to just be kind and be nice to one another. But that being said, Joe, I appreciate you coming on to the show, taking the time to talk with me. I appreciate your banter on Facebook. We have a lot of fun, and you keep me on my toes. And that's part of it for me. I don't want to get complacent in my faith and just start to take things for granted. I like to interact with different people, different backgrounds, and I thank you a lot for that.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. I had a great time.
Not a problem, man. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.